Representative Gosar, thank you for being on Crossroads. Speaking right now, you're pushing for investigations, this audit into election fraud. Can you tell us how that's going right now?
Yeah, so in the state of Arizona, you have to ask permission from the state legislature, which has oversight of our election processes within the state, to get the legislature, if it's not in session, a special legislative session to bring this up. Typically, you have to have the 2/3 of each house to be able to bring that forward on their own. Otherwise, it has to come from the governor's office. And right now, we're trying to get the governor's office so that they look at each printed ballot, calibrating each Republican, Democrat, in this case, Libertarian, that actually voted, and then compare it against the ticker tape of the machine. What's different about that is a regular audit would just take the number of paper ballots and see if they correspond to the ticker tape.
Now, in terms of where things are at, the New York Times just published an article saying they interviewed officials in every U.S. state and they found no evidence of election fraud. What's your response to that?
They've never been really truthful, to be honest with you. I mean, look at the cover-up of all the different things from Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the IRS, unmasking American citizens, the email scandal, the attacks on the press, Russiagate, Ukrainegate, Obamagate, and now Bidengate. Not one of them have carried anything. They've done nothing but attack this president every way he's done. So they're hardly the vestige of sound what's right and what's wrong. You couple that with the lack of enforcement by our justice system, you present a quandary for people. I always tell, and I told you earlier, Josh, trust is a series of promises kept. Tell me why the American public should trust the federal government. And why should they trust government to get an election right? Why would they trust them? Like, for example, the Judicial Watch actually filed a lawsuit against the state of California. They won it. California was remanded to get rid of 1.5 million voters off their rolls, illegal voters. They didn't. No one forced them to. So once again, that's why we do the things we do, is we want to present transparency and present to the American people and the people of Arizona. Listen, your vote went here. You can trust that when you do it from now on, it goes there. But these are the checks and balances that make sure that it happens.
I want to go into two quick points, but first off, you mentioned this subliminal messaging rule. I'd never heard of this before. Now, one of the big problems we have in the U.S. is that the media are calling the election before the whole thing's over. This is convincing a large part of the population that everything's done with, there's no use voting, and they're trying to press the media, trying to push Trump to concede the election before things are really finished. What is this subliminal messaging law?
So what ends up happening, individuals or marketing are forbidden to do some type of a subliminal message. We saw it in the 60s and 70s with different music, that there was some type of, if you played it, it's very slow, there was some message that was ingrained in it, that as you listen to the music, you got this message. Well, it's the same thing happening here, is that you're being told over and over that it's over, and it's over. And that conditions your mind to basically say, oh, it is over, or I'm going to change my ballot. Or my ballot's not even worthwhile putting it in, because it's over.
Now, in terms of what that would entail, if it's illegal, would the media be guilty of this?
Well, what I'm making the association, there's really no difference in that you're subliminally trying to change the individual's opinion by coercion of the messaging. And that should not be tolerated. That should be a violation. And we see it with the big techies in regards to the data that they're gathering from every time you click into your account, whatever you look on in the news, whatever you post on your Facebook. They're taking all that information and they're drawing conclusions.
You talked about integrity of government and the way it's being perceived by voters. Really, with the state of the elections, mainly on the left because the media is telling them Biden won, on the right because a lot of them don't believe in the integrity of the election because of some of these irregularities. The institution of government right now the lack of public trust in it is pretty high. Right. And you're pushing for this audit now. How does this relate to public trust in your opinion?
So what an audit does, a forensic audit does, is it takes all those paper ballots that all of us filled in, and basically it hand counts them. So you have a Republican, you have a Democratic judge looking over each ballot as they're counted. And each ballot is looked at to see, did they vote Republican, Democrat, or Libertarian? And they start counting, tabulating. So what that happens, it means it is a judge who comes from the public sector, comes from the private sector, comes from outside that are interested but are partisan. But both sets of eyes are looking at that ballot and calibrating it. Not guessing what the machine saw, but what judges who are actually looking at that mail ballot and counting. Then you compare it against the machine, and if there's a glitch or if there's software integrity has been compromised, the number will show you that.
I could see that receiving a lot of pressure because by the nature of an audit like that, that could prove or disprove whether election fraud had taken place.
Right.
And it's interesting because every election cycle we see allegations of election fraud. It's never really thoroughly investigated. Right. Have you had any pressure by pushing this? I'm curious.
I've had a number of people, particularly Democrats, saying, why would you do this as a foregone conclusion? I actually think this is a fabulous investment, no matter how it plays out. If it says there's no fraud, or if there is fraud, because what it does, I go back to that statement, trust is a series of promises kept. You're actually showing the voters, the Arizona, the American citizen, that these were actually vote tabulations. So you're starting to ease that proclamation that there's fraud, or there is. And so you're actually including the American public into that decision process, which is where we got to get back to. They're the government, we serve them.
Now, another big problem we've been seeing in the U.S. is that the big tech and big media have basically been working as the gatekeepers of information, even to the extent that President Trump, the President of the United States, is having tweets censored and being called, say, fake news or questionable news based on the, say, news reporting by news outlets that a lot of the country don't believe. What do you have to say about this?
It is. See, we're seeing way too much power being placed into these platforms. Now, when the platforms were built, Congress gave them a blanket immunity from being sued. That's as a platform, not as a publisher. And now they've moved into that publisher range. So we have to change what they call Section 230. It has to be done first. It can't be utilizing antitrust laws. If you do that right now with antitrust first, without touching Section 230, you're taking the big sharks like Google, Facebook, and dividing them into a school of piranha. They have the same ability to bite you, no ability to sue. You're just making more of them. So Section 230, we have to define that nebulous aspect of what is illegal conversation or speech. Is it treason? Is it the trafficking of human beings? Is it the trafficking of drugs? What is it? And then everything after that is the ability for those platforms to be sued on based upon the filter that you request as a consumer. That way we put the trial attorneys at odds with the platforms. That way what we do is we have these two big giants fighting it out. And we win. Every time I find that, when we put two opposite poles that are very powerful together, we win. It doesn't infer on our First Amendment rights, but it starts the accountability process, which is very important right now. But don't take my word for it. Go back to the Senate hearing with Dr. Epstein, probably the foremost authority in platforms. In 2016, he said 2.4 million voters were moved to Hillary Clinton. And he said they are prepared for over 15 million voters in 2020. I wonder whose side they were on. You brought up Mark Zuckerberg in Georgia. How about Mark Zuckerberg in Pennsylvania for 100 million?
One of the big questions now is about dominion. What do you know about dominion?
So first of all, we got to gather the evidence, and that's why you do these forensic audits. That's why you go through the painstaking process of doing it in the open. You follow the leads. Okay, why is it that we got a big spike of 90-year-olds that all of a sudden decided they wanted to register when they're in their 90s? You know, how does that work? How is it that we saw this propensity of these assisted living homes all register at the same time? You know, we got to get to the bottom of where this was going and what the data is. And when people sign affidavits, they're putting their reputation on there. That's a threat of perjury if you're wrong. So we got to investigate that. We got to get back to that rule of law, the application of the law to everybody, not just to some of us, but to every one of us. And we have to go back and look. You said, being threatened. You have Miss AOC that actually has got a nasty list. She's checking it once, checking it twice, making sure you go to the gulag if you don't get along with her. If you supported Donald Trump, the President Trump, his policies, or was one of his supporters, we won't tolerate you, is her message.
I did see that she was making a list of everybody who was going and supporting him. Yeah.
So I guess I'll be in one of the first people going to the gulag.
When it comes to the different allegations you've been hearing from your constituents, what have they been telling you?
Well, we had a big deal about the 2016 elections. Democrats said that the Russians were involved. Isn't it interesting, Jamie Raskin from Maryland, very liberal attorney, actually brought this up and actually introduced legislation to actually start changing this. The Senate committee, one of the Senate subcommittees actually reviewed a number of these programs, one of them being Dominion, and came up with the conclusion that pretty much 100% corruptible and 100% being able to be targeted and changed. That's not exactly great numbers there.
One of the big concerns people have had in the U.S., now, Democrats were more pushing for mail-in ballots. A lot of conservatives have not believed in the integrity of the mail-in ballot system. And now we've seen a lot of different anomalies with this. Can you tell us what you've been seeing in this area, in Arizona here, when it comes to the mail-in ballots?
Well, some of the things that we're looking at right now is once again, investigating those claims. I'll give you a case in my district, which in the state of Arizona, we've done mail-in ballots for over 20 years, if you so requested for an early ballot. So last year, or in 2018, in our district, the mail ballots went out. And usually 2 weeks later, you get the majority of those back. Well, they weren't coming back. So the county recorder went to the different post offices in the county, and there were very few ballots. She then went to Las Vegas and Henderson and found piles of them. Somebody within the Postal Service was setting them aside, and if she didn't bark, maybe they wouldn't have been returned. We've seen the same type of thing happening in Pennsylvania. We saw dumps in which Joe Biden got over tens of thousands of ballots, and not one ballot went to President Trump. Something's up here.
What have you seen with possible issues with these mail-in ballots?
And well, that's why we're investigating. We don't know. You see some of this in California, like in ballot harvesting. You see people being paid to actually get the numbers of people to give their ballots and to sign them over. So once again, you come with an accusation. You back it by either facts or disproving it. But you have to follow those leads to get that information. That's the case, and that's where we are right now. The process is that Democrats don't want it because they got the desired effect that they want. We as conservatives didn't get the result we wanted, but there's too many question marks that are here. There has been. And so it's time to have an exercise to make sure that the American public, one vote is allocated, a legal vote for the person that you so deem, and that the government's case is to put it in that proper place.
Now, in terms of the overall picture, in terms of you pushing for this audit, when it comes to the different allegations we've been seeing across this state, if you were to leave people with one thought in terms of what you're working on, what would you tell them?
What I'm after is to getting people to trust back in government. They don't trust government. And the very basic aspect that we had promised the American citizen was that you get a vote. It was a very exclusive safety and being able to pick freely the person of your choice to represent you. If we're going to get this country back to accountability, it starts with that vote, that you trust the government, that vote that you mark down on that piece of paper is tabulated for the right person in the right place. That's the whole basics of a democracy. If you can't ensure that, then you have something worse than a banana republic. You have something worse than Russia or China, or Venezuela. And maybe at that point, we're giving them a bad name for how bad this is. But that's the basic premise of being an American. You got a chance to vote, the freedom of vote, the freedom to vote to who you want to represent you. That power is magnificent, but it comes with strings. It comes with accountability. We're at that point that we need to reassure that accountability.
Representative Gosar, thanks again for being on Crossroads.
Josh, I appreciate your time.